Let's dive into the fascinating ways we categorize life on Earth, starting with something called clades, or monophyletic groups.
Oh man, clades. This is biology at its finest. So a clade, it's basically all the descendants of a common ancestor, right? Imagine a family reunion, but instead of just your immediate family, it includes everyone directly related, all the cousins, the grandparents, the great grandkids, everyone. But here's the catch. It also includes the ancestor, so it's the complete lineage, no gaps.
Okay, so it's kind of like picking a single branch on the tree of life?
Exactly. If you were looking at mammals, for instance, that's a monophyletic group. Every mammal, humans, elephants, whales, traces back to a single ancestor. And thanks to shared evolutionary traits, they're all connected.
What about when we use terms that don't fit this strict definition? Like fish, for example.
Ah, yes, now you're talking about paraphyletic groups, which diverge a bit. See, when you say fish, you're grouping things together that share a broad similarity, but you're leaving out some modern descendants. Like, technically, if we included every descendant of a fish ancestor, you'd end up including frogs, salamanders, even us. A true clade for fish wouldn't stop at, well, fish.
That's a tricky way to think about it. So we're drawing lines for convenience more than accuracy?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, biological classification does prioritize clarity, but life, evolution, it doesn't care about our neat little categories. And then you've got polyphyletic groups. These are trickier because instead of focusing on a single lineage, you're putting together species that share convergent traits despite no close relation.
Give me an example of polyphyletic groups.
Flying vertebrates. Think about it. Bats, birds, even flying snakes. They all fly or glide, but evolutionally, their ability to fly originated independently. Bats developed wings from mammalian limbs, birds from feathers. Oh, and snakes? They spread their ribs to glide through the air. It's wild, right? Flight here is a convergent trait. Evolution solving the same problem in different ways.
That's fascinating. So polyphyletic groups form around traits, not ancestors?
Yep. And that's what makes them interesting. They're less about lineage and more about patterns and adaptation. Every species in a polyphyletic group reached the same solution, but through entirely separate evolutionary lineages. That convergence says a lot about how environments sculpt species over time.
And it all comes back to adaptation in the face of challenges.
Exactly. It's the story of life in action.
Speaking of the story of life in action, let's get to the foundation of what makes it all possible. That's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, right? The very building blocks of life.
Yes, it's amazing, right? For example, oxygen, mostly found as water in your body, but also crucial in respiration. Your cells literally can't function without it.
And carbon is like the building block that holds it all together?
Exactly. I like to say carbon is the Lego block of life. It's small, neutral, and can form up to 4 bonds at once. That's what gives it the flexibility to make all kinds of molecules like DNA, proteins, or even sugars.
Totally. Speaking of connections, can we dig into what holds all this together? Chemical bonds?
Yes, chemical bonds. Okay, so first off is covalent bonds. These are the heavy lifters, the strongest bonds. When two atoms share electrons, for example in water, they create a super stable molecule. It's like two kids sharing toys. It keeps them happy and balanced.
So sharing is strong. What about ionic bonds?
Ionic bonds are more like trades. One atom gives up an electron to another. Sodium and chlorine, classic example. It's how you get table salt. What's cool is that these bonds dissolve easily in water. That's why salt disappears when you stir it into soup.
And finally, hydrogen bonds. What's their deal?
Hydrogen bonds are like the friendly handshakes between molecules. They're weaker than covalent and ionic bonds, but incredibly important. Think of water molecules. Hydrogen bonds between them are why water sticks together, why it flows, why it expands when frozen. It's what makes water so magical for life.
So covalent bonds are like unbreakable partnerships. Ionic bonds are trades, and hydrogen bonds are the glue of connections. Got it.
Exactly. Each has its role, and together they form the backbone of chemistry and life.
All right, now that we've covered the bonds making up life's chemistry, let's shift gears to organic molecules. Today we're talking about lipids and proteins, two heavyweights that rely on those very bonds to shape biology itself.
Absolutely. Lipids and proteins are like, well, the unsung heroes of biology. I mean, they basically hold us together literally and figuratively.
Okay, let's start with lipids. We hear about fats all the time, with diets, cooking. So what makes them so special biologically?
Great question. Lipids are kind of like energy batteries and barriers. So picture triglycerides. These are your standard fat molecules. They consist of a head and three long, zigzagging fatty acid tails. Those tails? Packed with energy. It's why fats are such an efficient energy source. They're like heavy duty fuel for your cells.
And I'm guessing these tails do more than just store energy?
Oh, big time. Think about their hydrophobic nature. Those tails hate water like how rain rolls off an umbrella. Contrast that with the hydrophilic heads of phospholipids. Their love for water is more like cozy rain boots in a puddle. This duality makes phospholipids essential building blocks for cell membranes.
Rain boots and umbrellas, huh? So the phospholipids sort of self-assemble into membranes?
Exactly. Without needing any extra effort, they form a barrier to keep the inside of the cell separate from the outside world. The hydrophilic heads face the water, while the hydrophobic tails hide away. That's the lipid bilayer. No energy required, and it's genius.
Okay. I didn't realize lipids did so much heavy lifting. What about proteins, though?
Oh man, proteins are incredible. Picture them as the Swiss Army knives of biology. Structurally, they're made of amino acids linked into chains called polypeptides. Fold those chains in specific ways, and bam, you've got a protein with a precise function. Think enzymes that speed up reactions or hemoglobin ferrying oxygen through your bloodstream.
And the folding. How crucial is that to their function?
It's everything. The folding determines their shape, and the shape determines their job. For example, a protein with a hydrophobic core, like a secret hiding place, works differently than one that's super hydrophilic. And here's the kicker. If you alter that folding too much, say with heat or acid, you denature the protein. It loses its structure and becomes useless. Think of frying an egg. Once it's solid, you can't turn it back.
So proteins are versatile but fragile if conditions change too much?
Exactly. It's both a strength and a vulnerability. But their efficiency and variety make them indispensable. They build tissues, regulate your body, and even act as molecular messengers.
All right, so fats store energy and act as barriers. Proteins, meanwhile, are multitaskers with endless variations. It's amazing how these molecules shape life.
Amazing, indeed. And that's just scratching the surface. Whether it's the simplicity of a lipid bilayer or the complexity of protein folding, biology is full of elegant solutions to life's challenges. Honestly, it's humbling.
I couldn't agree more. And that's all for today, folks. This has been a fascinating dive into the chemistry of life. Thanks as always, Dr. Rosario, for sharing your knowledge.
Always a pleasure. Can't wait for what's next.
And for our listeners, we'll catch you next time. Take care.